One of the hardest parts about growing a business was learning how to be a leader, how to grow a team, how to create a culture, and how to keep people happy, how to keep creativity alive, and keep the company growing at the same time. If a company's not growing, people aren't happy. Usually there's a couple things that are going off or going wrong. And we recently had a guest come in and speak to our NGM Plusers, our VIPers of our students. And the talk was so good and so powerful that I wanted to bring it to you guys onto the podcast. And this is a very special thing that I'm doing because these types of VIP days where we bring in these experts are usually only available to our VIP students, to the NGM Plus community. But the feedback was huge, and we decided to treat that talk almost like a podcast interview. There's some Q&A that will happen at the end of it. But what our guest does is bring you guys through what he calls the infinity loop, which he's used to grow multiple companies. Some of them he sold, some of them he still has, but not only to grow them, but to grow them by having the most amazing culture and empowering people and his team. The talk is so good, and I want you to listen to it. So if that sounds interesting to you, well, keep on listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have something really special for you guys today. We have a guest speaker coming in to chat with you guys about limitless growth. This is an absolute necessary talk you're going to need as you guys start to build out a team, as your business gets bigger. This is a lot of stuff that I had to learn the hard way. I had to make a lot of mistakes on how to manage people, and I didn't do it the best I probably could when I first got started. I didn't learn any of this stuff. So we ended up, Julie ended up finding Frankie Russo and sent me some of his stuff, and it was absolutely amazing. And so I was like, yeah, bring him on. Let's have him talk to you guys. So Frankie, I just want to welcome you, first of all, here to all of our students. And also, I just wanted you to give a little bit of a background on what is limitless growth and what is it that you actually do.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I couldn't be more excited about this, especially when Julie reached out and was talking about this next generation of entrepreneurs. That is something I'm deeply passionate about. I did it a lot like you, right? Learn the hard way. And sometimes that is the best way and only way to learn, which is why the theme is always keep experimenting, right? Keep trying and don't flinch. So I started my entrepreneur journey very young at 20 years old. So I'm 43. So I guess I've been an entrepreneur for 23 years. But I argue that sometimes I started before that because I was inventing things as a kid. And I created these crazy Gandhi t-shirts in high school. So maybe that's when I started. I don't really know. Didn't have an LLC.
Hold on. What's a crazy Gandhi t-shirt?
Okay, so this is kind of a fun story. So whenever I was in high school, there was this one wacky English teacher. He's and Arsenio was his name. And he was just always looking for weird things that he could get people excited about the learnings. And there was this quote from Gandhi that says, did you have a nice bowel movement today, sisters? And he thought that was just hilarious. And so he said, if you guys show up in a t-shirt we'll give you 100 on a test if you have a Gandhi t-shirt on. So everybody wanted 100 on a test. So it was the first time I had this demand. Figured out real quickly how to make a t-shirt. It was brown with white. It was kind of funny with the picture of Gandhi. Everybody got 100. I sold the t-shirts for, I think, $12. They costed me $4. And that was my first experience of like, wait a second. I can literally just resell something and make a margin. So that was my first experiment there. Didn't know what that would turn into over the years, which has been multiple companies. I've had some companies fail. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then I've had some companies do some exponential things like 60x growth in 3 years.
Wow.
And so we're going to dive into all of that today. But yeah, I couldn't be more happy to be here. Love this audience. Love this type of outlier, weird group. It's always my favorite.
Yeah. This is great. Well, thank you for being here. And I think, can you still hear me okay? The audio kind of cut out for a minute.
Oh yeah, I've been able to hear you good. How's my audio?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Okay, perfect. Cool. Well, let's just hop into it. I know one of the topics and things that you like to talk about is breaking free from stagnation. the way I interpret stagnation is sort of like being plateaued
Hmm.
in revenue, but I know it's probably beyond that. So can you break down kind of like what stagnation is? What are some signs that an organization or a company, even a small company, is like fallen into like that growth rut, and what can leaders do to sort of reorganize that or fix that problem?
100%. Yeah. So when you think about the stagnation, and let me click on this real quick.
Sure.
So stagnation, the way that I look at it is really five pieces. And so everything that I work through is in this model or idea of an infinity loop, right? And there's
Mhm.
different types of infinity loops. There's the infinity loop that's good, and then there's the infinity loop that's bad. And so everything boils down to cycles. And what happens is that most companies believe that growth and continuous growth comes from success. But it turns out that the truth is that it actually comes from failure.
Mhm.
Most of the time, growth comes from failure because when you are failing or things aren't going well, that's when you start to get desperate again. That's when you start doing the work again that you did in the beginning that you many times will stop. The problem is that life and business gets better. You get better at it.
Right.
And then you start to get into these new cycles, right? Even for small companies, but absolutely for large companies, right? So one of my tech companies I sold to a Fortune 500
Mhm.
and they have 12,000 employees. So the economics and scale is quite different, but the rules are the same. And so what ends up happening is that you get this mentality, right? And you're starting to scale up. Maybe you're at 50 people, maybe you're at 100. You hire a new person and you're training them on what we do, right?
Yeah.
This is how we got here. And so that's what really is the enemy of growth. So it ends up starting with this denial that you need to change. So
Okay.
you start where you start to get into this denial that like we've made it, we did this, this is how we did it, this is why we did it, and this is why you should do it that way. So that creates a status quo. So that begins this cycle, and you get into these silos now. Now we have a department for this and a department for that, where before we were a small entity and everything just kind of organically worked together. Then you
Mhm.
start getting into more rigid processes, which kills some of the creativity and imagination. And essentially, over time, people become more disengaged. And most importantly, customers and users become disengaged.
I
So
see.
this is critical. And so I call this the stagnation spiral, right? So the
Yep.
stagnation spiral, this is the villains of growth as I see it. And it may not be in this exact order, but as companies start to get into a cycle of repeating these types of things, and it's hard because a lot of times you're blind to it when you're too close to it, right?
Yeah.
So many times the issue is that we're so close to it that we can't even see it.
Right.
And we start to lose touch with how much we understood the problem we solved when we started the organization. And so it gets more and more watered down, and it's easy for that to happen. So when I talk about the stagnation, these are the things that you look for, and you don't ever have to get into this. And I'll talk a little bit more about, kind of what is the opposite, right? So if this is the villain, what's the hero? But yeah, so that's really the first thing I look at when I'm talking about stagnation spiral.
Okay, got it. So it kind of reminds me, one of my mentors always told me success is one of the worst teachers that you can ever have. Like success doesn't really teach you anything.
That's right.
It's where when you start to fail, it causes you to reinvent, to get creative again, and all that great stuff. So
That's right.
I had a question on this, and this is more just for my own personal. I'm just curious. When it comes to like the silo decisions, because we're at a part in our company where it's like departments are being formed, the department heads are making decisions and those sort of things.
Yep.
What sort of signs do you look for to kind of tell you like, hey, some things might be off here when you
Hmm.
get to the silo decision making part of your business?
Absolutely. So many companies, they fail at this moment. You would think that companies would fail because of, they didn't have good enough ideas or their branding
Mhm.
wasn't good enough or whatever.
Right.
But the problem with the silos, so diversity of thought is critical for innovation.
Mm.
So the silos, if they are working together, can actually create a very powerful thing. But it is harder and harder to get all of those to align. So the issue you want to be looking for is misalignment. Now, it's okay if people disagree. It's okay if we don't see it the same way, but you have to stay in it until we can all agree. And that agreement needs to be really, really aligned with what it is that the customer needs. And so that
Okay.
becomes this debate a lot of times, right? Product thinks
Yep.
that it's one way, sales thinks it's another way, the HR and admin people think it's another way, operations. So you have all these different people kind of and the best companies are the ones that continually come together. They do the dirty work of really spending time working on their business instead of in it. I'm sure you all have talked about that plenty in
Yep.
your deals. It's a real problem. It's very difficult to do, especially if you have a small business. It is so difficult. I had to force myself over the years to get better and better at that. And it was a lot of work, but that's what it takes to really, because somebody needs to be able to see the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'll give it to you this way. So you remember the Walkman? How old
Yeah.
are you?
Yeah. I'm probably like 14, maybe.
Okay,
Maybe
so you're like,
15 now.
you had the CD Walkman, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, the old Walkman was a cassette. Obviously, came out in the '79, and Walkman owned portable music for 3 decades.
Mm.
Right? They were it for portable music. So it's like, what
Mhm.
happened? Now
Right.
you're probably thinking, obviously, the iPod happened, and you're not wrong. But
Right.
why didn't Sony come out with the iPod? They had an MP3 player at least a year before Apple, maybe 2 years.
Mm.
What was it? I'll tell you why. And I'll show you. I keep this in my pocket just in case it comes up. So this right here, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these. This
Mm.
is a Sony mini disc. Let me see if I can get it in focus.
Oh,
There
there
you
it goes. Yeah.
go. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. You put a little cassette in there. What this is a smaller version that you can record onto that doesn't skip of a CD player. Did you
Mm.
have one of these MP3 players?
No, I don't think I've ever even seen one of the that specific
It
thing.
didn't last long because 1,000 songs in your pocket crushed it.
Yeah.
Now, this is not because they weren't creative enough. It's because there were so many silos at Sony that could not get on the same page
Uh,
that's how they died. And by the way, that's not just Sony. Blockbuster, BlackBerry, Kodak, all these companies, it's not because they weren't creative enough. It's not because they weren't innovative enough. It's because they underestimated the speed at which the users and the world would create the demand and force people to go in a direction. They thought they were so big that they would tell the market where it's going to go. And that is where really large companies go to die. And it's not about creativity, it's about alignment.
Mm.
They weren't aligned. So when you have an alignment like this, that's how you create those silos coming together. That has to be like so hypercritical. And the bigger you get, the more critical it becomes. And because like right now, think about AI for a sec. So you have took about 100 years, a century, for all of the United States to even have enough electricity after the light bulb was invented, right? So light bulbs invented, took a century for 100 million households to even be able to use it. Make sense?
Right. Yep.
Okay, Netflix, they got to 100 million users in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instagram did it in 2 years. ChatGPT did it in 2 months, and most of that was in 5 days. 100 million users in almost 5 days.
That's crazy.
Right? Yeah. So adoption rates and this idea of like change and disruption and all that, it's happening at these breakneck speeds that we've never seen before. Yeah. So it's so critical that you stay aligned. It's so critical that you're hyper focused on like the what ifs and you're constantly experimenting. And we're going to get more into that. But I just wanted to give you that little feedback because that's how I've seen. Because I've really spent a lot of time breaking this down. I've worked with a lot of companies, done a lot of research, and like, what is it that goes wrong? And it's so easy to think, it's like, oh, they weren't creative enough, you know?
Right. Yeah. And even in those stories that you're talking about now, you can totally see that denial stage of what you're talking about. Like we're so big, no one can. So the ego comes in and just like takes over and starts.
And it becomes systematical. Right? Like these big companies, I always thought there was like some evil person at the top. There's not. There's no one evil person at the top. It becomes a system. I'm not saying the system's evil. I'm just saying it's like, it's this like.
It's dysfunctional.
Force. It's a force. And it's not any one person. It's wild how it happens to the best of companies.
That's crazy. I love this. Can we dive into like how this looks like when it's in practice? And
let's talk about it.
Okay, cool.
All right, cool. So what's the solution? All right. I call the solution the growth loop. And the growth loop is something that can be continually applied. And it's designed for one specific thing, right? So where does growth come from? Like, how do you create growth, especially if you're starting to plateau, even if you're just starting up? And essentially growth comes from inflection points. And so what I want to talk to you about today is this idea of how do we create inflection points? So there's small inflection points and there's big inflection points. And essentially what we're trying to do here is get to a place where we create that sustained momentum again. Okay. So inside of when you start to see these growth cycles, there's this thing called the S curve. Okay. Mm-hmm. And in the S curve, there's an anatomy of it, and it's an infinity loop that we've been talking about, right? So that inside, this is all stuff that like is proven over and over again. There's a lot of different research about it. And what I've done over time is use it in my own business. Now, I'll be honest with you. Most of what I've succeeded at it's usually been in hindsight. Yep. Okay, so I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not like the PhD, masters, MIT, all that stuff. I'm none of that. Right. I'm like all of y'all. And so as much as I'm telling you all this now with clarity, understand it's from 16 years old to 43 years old, from the Gandhi t-shirt to now. It's stuff that in hindsight, I realized, holy crap, this is why it worked. But I made it work and then figured out after the fact. So the idea here is like, okay, cool. Can we jump ahead? Now, keep in mind, I had mentors that maybe didn't break it down quite like this, but they were a huge part of coaching and teaching and educating like the way you do. Yeah. That was critical. Yeah. So anyway, inside of this infinity loop, it looks a little bit like this. Okay, so these are the key ingredients that if you can turn this into a different type of cycle, where you're looking at this as something that you repeat as often as needed. Now, eventually you exit the loop, but think of the momentum kind of like you've seen Interstellar, right?
Yeah, love that
movie. Start out, once they get out of the orbit of the Earth, then it starts spinning. And that momentum of the spinning is what allows them to get all the way to Saturn. Because they don't have enough fuel or anything like that without it. This is the same kind of concept, is that continuous momentum. And so a lot of times what people believe is that if we want to grow, what do we need to do? All right, when you spend more on advertising, maybe we need to do an acquisition and we need to do more sales activity, different sales activity, change the story, all of that, right? Essentially brute force. All right. Yep. And there is a lot of work in all of this. But one thing that I started to realize that we did really well, because I mean, when we did the 60X growth, we had no sales team, which is interesting. If you think about
really
it.
Interesting.
Also think about a lot of companies out there that don't have sales teams that are essentially the biggest in the world.
Yeah.
You barely have sales teams for Apple or Meta or they're all inside sales for sure. Right. So most of the biggest companies in the world are only inside sales.
Yeah.
And you got to think about that. And it's because that they do the work and they absolutely dig into these components. So if we're going to get out of denial, what does that look like? Well, first we have to get honest. So I am really big on honesty. Yeah. Okay. It's digging in to be honest with you and then also with myself. So the hard work is staying honest with ourselves. All right. So I talk a lot about authenticity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But one of the things that I find is that where companies fail is that they aren't honest enough about the problem. Okay. Right. And so Sony wasn't honest enough.
When you say the problem, is that the problem within the company or the problem you're solving for the customer, or both?
It's both.
Okay.
So the main thing is honest about why we're not growing. What is the problem keeping us from growth? That's how I want you to think of it. Okay. And it's always going to include all stakeholders.
Got it.
And your stakeholders, just so everyone knows, is your customers, which can also be known as users, clients, patients. Okay. That's your first set of stakeholders. Your second set of stakeholders are the people on your team.
Okay.
And your third is your community.
Got it.
Okay. And so I'm going to drop into that a little bit more in a minute, but yes, this is about getting honest about what is keeping us from growth.
Got it.
All right. Okay. The next thing we have to do is we've got to open ourselves up to have and use our imagination in ways that might seem ridiculous, in ways that we haven't used before. Because when you're trying to solve the problem using everything you already know, you're not going to solve it, and not in the exponential way that we're discussing. You're just not. And so you have to be willing to really challenge it. This helps to challenge the status quo. This is what explodes rigid processes and allows you to recreate new ones. So the imagination piece is big. The third piece is the alignment component. Before we start experimenting, okay, we have to align on the solution. We have to align on the solution so that, because in the imagination process of 2, there's almost no rules.
Yeah.
At 3, we've got to decide on which one we're going to go with, at least for this loop. Knowing, hey, look, the most important thing about this is we know we're coming back around for another loop.
Yeah.
So you don't have to take it so seriously. In fact, that's where I get to number 4. So every single thing I ever did to this day was an experiment. Every company, every product was an experiment. Now, your customers might get a little nervous when you tell them that, but I used to lead with that in a sales conversation. I used to lead with it because the fact is that was the only way I didn't take this so damn seriously that I wanted to blow my brains out from the stress.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if anybody can relate to that. You don't have to raise your hand or not, but that's a whole thing. And so when you think of it like an experiment, you realize, okay, it starts to really change your relationship to failure.
And that's one of the things that we talk about too, because we teach communication and messaging. And then I always tell everyone, like, we literally don't, when it comes to advertising, you don't know what's going to work. Like some of the things that I thought were going to work just absolutely failed. And some of the things that I didn't think would work absolutely crushed it. And so you have to treat everything as an experiment. And I found the exact same thing. When you treat it that way, you don't really look at failure as the traditional sense of what failure is. It's just a learning lesson that gave you data to make more educated, better decisions on the next round. And it just takes all the fear out of it, I feel like.
Yes. It makes it a game.
Yeah,
in a good
exactly.
way. And so when you have a game, let's say you're playing a video game and you lose, that's fine. You just start over.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how you want to look at this. And the thing is that's contrary to what a lot of people think. It's like, whoa, this is business. This isn't a game. We got people's lives at stake. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And that's why we're doing this. It's because people's lives are at stake, because livelihoods at stake, because this is the type of mentality that when we all start, I mean, I'm talking to, I think, to a lot of startup entrepreneurs here. So in some ways, this is like, all right, cool. I get it. But this is some of you need this today. Some of you already know this, and some of you will need this in a couple of years, I hope, because you're going to get so big that you have to figure out this deal here. But the idea is that when we go into these situations where okay, I need growth, this is the first place we look. You work this process, you can work it over and over again, you inventory it, you come together on it, you give the time and investment to do this. And you're not always going to necessarily live completely in this, but the really great companies, and the company I was able to grow 60x, we lived in this. We just lived it. It was our culture. So if you can get to a point where your whole culture does it, great. If you can't, at least take the time to come into it routinely as needed. But the best way to do it is the culture. So the last piece of this is this idea of the empathy lens. Okay.
Yep.
The empathy lens is really potent because all of this along the way has to have that empathy lens. And the empathy lens is for the stakeholders.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. So this is essentially the growth loop. Now there's some things from a cultural standpoint and from a, motivating the team on this that I think is pretty important as well, which we can drop into.
Yeah, let's move into that. I actually had one quick question on the empathy lens. Is that just as simple as just like having empathy for your customers and the team and just having compassion for them, or is it deeper than that?
All right, so let me drop into this just for a second, because empathy is a big part of the work that I do.
Okay.
So I want to first start off by telling you, what is it that got me to a point where I was really attached to this concept of empathy and why it was so important for me, both individually and as an organization. Okay. So as a kid, I grew up working in inner city missions. So my parents ran homeless shelters. Okay. Which is awesome. Very noble, incredible work. Some of the best work I've ever seen. Now, the problem is that when you work in these missions, you are only one notch above being homeless yourself. Yeah. Okay. And so then what happens is that you're pretty poor yourself. And then when I got out of high school, the board of my dad's nonprofit kicked him out because he didn't want to take money from the government. So that not only did he get kicked out in the end of all this mission, he also didn't make any money. So I was like, F this shit.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we curse on your podcast, but
No,
F this
you
shit. And
can.
and
Yeah.
I ran totally in the other direction. And I said, I have one objective. I'm never going to be poor.
Yeah.
And that was a hell of a ride. In fact, it led me to a really, really bad bottom. And so in 2008, I actually hit rock bottom from addiction.
Mm,
Okay. And you might be thinking, okay, what does this have to do with empathy and the growth loop? Well, I'm about
right.
to tell you. All right. So the thing about addiction, so I got sober 16 years ago in a couple of months, April 12th of 2008.
Mm,
And since that time, I've learned something that I did not expect going into it. So I had about a 10-year break between when I got out of this mindset of like helping others and helping the true poor to this moment that I hit rock bottom. Those years, by the way, I was in the mortgage business. So something else happened in 2008, which was the mortgage crisis,
yep.
which, by the way, is one of my growth tales that goes the other way. I'm going to show you that model here in a second. So I'll tell you exactly how to get this wrong. But anyway, so, my family falls apart. I lose my company. I went from a sports car to walking to work. And you got to think, I was living in a small town in Louisiana and making $40,000 a month, and all my friends were working for me.
Yeah.
So I just thought everything I touched was going to turn to gold or something.
Yep.
And I couldn't have been more wrong. But the point is that I found out that getting sober and staying sober are two very different things.
Mm.
Very different. And it turns out the only way to stay sober is actually to help other people get sober.
Oh, interesting.
Absolutely. So there's a little thing called the helper's high that started getting researched in the 80s. Have you heard of it?
No.
All right, check this out. So there's an actual science now around what gets released in the brain that's almost identical to the chemicals that we get from doing drugs when we help someone unconditionally.
Wow.
Wholly profound, right?
Yeah.
So what happened for me is that helping others became my new drug. And so I've probably sponsored at this point 300 different dudes get sober.
Wow. That's amazing.
Right? And so it's like, why would somebody do that? So they tell you, look, it's insurance from a slip and whatnot. And some of the people on the call maybe have family members that are in the program or got sober. Maybe you're been sober, used to be sober, whatever. But at the end of the day, what reason it works is because I had to find something that could give me the high I was looking for.
Right.
To replace it. It was this profound thing because I ended up helping a lot of people, having empathy for a lot of people, but it wasn't because I was a saint.
Right.
It was because I wanted fulfillment. Yeah. And as a result, people were helped. So I started looking at this for work. All right. So let's drop into this. So that's where my relationship to empathy started 16 years ago as an adult. Yeah. But then I started to realize the power of this across the board. If you create a whole culture of this, everyone is all of a sudden fulfilled. So we're always trying to figure out, how do we get people to love what they do? Because when they love what they do, they're at full capacity. They give 110%. You don't even have to ask, which was my company. My company, people loved what they did. It was a new thing every day. What they did mattered. They worked harder than they even knew they could. They did things that they didn't believe they could. And it was because of this mentality that we're going to help others first. Yeah. So the empathy model goes to serving the stakeholder because it fulfills the organization and it fulfills you individually. And it's a powerful, powerful force. And we've all felt it. Everyone on this call has done something good for someone else that wasn't for a direct return.
Right. Right.
And that's the idea, right? Because there's so many times I've given things and done things for customers and team members that do not make sense on paper.
Yeah.
But those are the things that have really made me, is these opportunities that don't make sense on paper, but you do it anyway because you realize, okay, wow, this is what I want to do. I'm fulfilled. And guess what? The loyalty that's built from your stakeholders by putting them first, because you've probably heard this too. If you spend all of your life helping everybody else get what they want and need, you want and need for nothing. Yeah. It's the same concept, but it's just kind of, I got to it in this like kind of alternative way. So I wanted to share that with you, but it's a powerful force. So at the forefront of all of this is that, the practical component. And it fulfills multiple things at the same time. That's the beauty of the empathy component, is that it solves the customer problem, which we all know has to be priority, and the user problem. Of course, it has to be priority. But at the same time, that can be aligned with helping the team and
Yep.
fulfilling the team and helping the community. And so that's how I really look at things. Didn't always look at it that way, but
Yeah.
ever since I started to, it's been a game changer for me.
I mean, I love it. Like even inside of our Slack, inside of our organization, we have a whole channel on student wins, client wins, where every day we're sharing the wins of how we've been able to help people.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very, very fulfilling, but I love the underlying sort of even message in that is like, and hopefully this doesn't come off as offensive, but like you almost look at the addiction that you had and you could categorize that as a problem or a failure or a big struggle or whatever, however you want to categorize it, but it launched you into learning this amazing lesson.
Everything.
And so it goes back to the whole failure thing of like the
Yep.
failure isn't really a failure. They're blessings in disguise if you choose to look for those lessons and choose to learn what it is you're supposed to be learning from and turn it into something beautiful like you've done here. And so that's amazing. And so I've not intentionally been using it in the way you've been using it, but we've been doing it inside of our company. And now I understand why it works, especially in our industry, because there's so many people that are like, they just care about the sale. They just care about making the money. They just care about
That's right.
bait and switching. And then the second you just you show empathy and that you care for people's success, the loyalty, like you said, that they have goes through the roof. So I love it. And I know you also talk about authenticity, imagination, collaboration, and things like that as well. Can we talk a little bit about that and how that plays a role into the infinity loop and the growth and sustainable growth as well?
Okay, now, all right, good. We can have some fun. This is one of my favorite topics. So, all right, as we get deeper into like what keeps this momentum going and we start thinking about this, it's one of the things that happened for me from getting sober. And then 7 years ago, I went through this crazy divorce and I had this emotional bottom. And I had to do this journey of figuring out how to become more authentic because I realized that I was starting to get very stagnant. And this was before, by the way, the 60x growth and some of the big, big wins. So I'd already had some success, but I was really plateauing, very much in a stagnation spiral. And I realized how much of it was tied to living an inauthentic existence. And so I went to several different things out there in this, experiential therapy and all kinds of stuff. And I started to realize that there was this relationship to the kid inside of me. Right. Like the 5-6-year-old, they call it the inner child. I don't know if you have done any of that kind of work. And what I started to realize is that I had abandoned that part of me. And there's a reason why. It's because everyone told me that the way I was back then was weird. Okay. Because back then, just to give you a little feedback, I wanted to be an astronaut, inventor. I wanted to be a cowboy and a TV evangelist all at the same time.
Yeah.
All right. And so when you're trying to be all that and you're with kids that just want to play sports or kids that just want to go outside and play, and I'm literally trying to invent a time machine at 6 years old and hoverboards. I built 2 hoverboards, none of which obviously worked. Otherwise we wouldn't be on the call today. But it was this wild thing that I started to realize how much I left behind. And so the reason I bring it up when I talk with entrepreneurs and other people that I help is because there's something very, very, very valuable in this. And it goes back to how can the organization love their weird and how can we individually love their weird? Going deeper into this fulfillment, because what happens is that over time, this is kind of how the trajectory went for us, is that as we started to love our weird more, we started to create this ability to show up with your own brand of weird. You built this level of trust, safety, authenticity within the culture. Right? That was part of it. And then from there, you ended up with this opportunity because when you have a diversity of thought and when you are willing to be weird and you're willing to go back into that 5-year-old, you also have the ability to be more imaginative, right? Because a lot of the things that we loved as kids were weird, right? The things we thought we could do were weird. And then, of course, this idea of generosity and collaboration, which I've talked to you about. So when I think about this, the process, right? This is like, all right, cool. Let's go a little deeper into like what the loop. So this getting honest part is critical because one of the things that happens is that because people don't show up authentically at work, no one knows them and no one knows the potential and capacity of what could be because of whatever reason. And it may be because it's not a safe place or just maybe something personal with the person that they don't know. But as we encourage people to be more authentic, it creates a very important environment. And you can read far and wide on why authenticity matters. And one of the things about my program and process is that it's the combination of the 3.
Yeah.
That's what makes the magic. And I call the whole kind of thing loving your weird. Because, it starts with getting honest. So let's just say your organization has gotten to a point where they're authentic, they're honest, and all that good stuff. Everybody shows up as themselves. Great.
Yeah.
Well, the next thing that people get wrong is that they believe that everything is about just this rapid absorption of knowledge. I got to know everything. I got to know all the different things. And because we were taught, right, that knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
But the thing I've come to realize over the course of my little career is that there's something actually a little more powerful than knowledge. And that is imagination.
Mm.
Imagination is more powerful than knowledge. And obviously, I'm not the first person to say that.
Right.
So this idea of how can we unleash imagination throughout the culture, right? But what happens is you're going to have team members, they don't believe that they're imaginative. So they don't identify as imaginative. So a lot of times what I start by doing is taking them on a journey to show them that absolutely they're imaginative, even at a genius level, and that there's science to prove it. Okay? Let me tell you a little bit about it. So basically, this idea of trying to figure out, is imagination learned? Is creativity taught? Or is it something you're born with? So back in the late 60s, during the space race against Russia, NASA tapped a guy named George Land to do a study. Some of y'all maybe seen George Land out there. He's got some interesting things. But one of my favorites was this study where they took this test that was actually designed for how we were going to do a test of imagination, genius level imagination for new hires at NASA. Because they realized that they had to innovate continuously, and they had to hire the best and brightest minds. So they created this simple test. Well, what happened was the test was so simple, they were like, what if we gave this to kids? So they gave the test to 1,600 children.
Yep.
And out of those 1,600 children, they represent a sample size of the United States. How many do you think tested at that genius level?
I don't know. I kind of want to say all of them, maybe.
Right? You're optimistic, and I've been kind of leading you right to it.
I don't know.
So 98% at 5 years old. It's incredible,
That's
right?
crazy,
The same test they were giving to these adults. Wait till you hear what the adults made. So they were so excited, they decided to make this a longitudinal test. So now they said, okay, we're going to test these same kids at 10 years old. Now, what do you think it was at 10 years old?
I'm sure it dropped. I would still imagine it's fairly high. I'm going to go with like maybe 70%.
30%.
30? Oh my gosh.
30%.
Crazy.
All right, now check this out. 100,000 adults took the test. More now, but back then it was at least 100,000. Now, what do you think their score was?
15%?
2.
Oh my gosh.
2%
That's crazy.
tested at that genius level of imagination. So it turns out that this imagination, creativity, this incredible raw gold that is needed to fuel these loops is not learned. It's unlearned.
How old were they at the first test?
5.
Okay. Wow.
So a lot of the work that I do is, what were you into at 5 years old? So I'll just throw it out there. I wasn't planning on doing this, but and then I do want to save some time for questions and stuff.
Yeah.
But here's what I want everybody to do. I want you to think about what you were into at 5 years old. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit so we can spend some time on this.
Yeah.
By the way, before I get there, this is what happened to the mortgage company because I failed to do any of those things and I stayed in a stagnation spiral. And these are the multiple inflection points that created the 60x growth from 2007 to 2021. Mm-hmm. And the 2017 to 21 was the 3 years with the real spike. But these inflection points were the components, right? Gotcha. So I just wanted y'all to have that. Okay, anyway, so like I said, I want you to put in the chat, what were you into at 5 years old? All right, so for me, the biggest thing that I was into, I told you, was this idea of cowboy, astronaut, inventor, TV preacher, right? Mm. And so put in the chat what you were into at 5. Maybe not what you wanted to be. You don't necessarily know that all the time. But what is it that you were into? Were you curious? Were you building forts?
Can you see the chat, or you want me to read it to you?
Well, they can just load it up, and we'll grab some on there. In fact, the people that I'm going to look save the chat for me. I want to check it out in a minute. But
okay,
I actually want to talk to some people, and you got two options. You can come on, tell me what you're into at 5, and we can have some fun with that, or you can tell me what questions you have as related to your business. Both are equally as valuable in my mind, because here's why I'm talking to you about this 5-year-old, and then we'll open it for questions. Mm-hmm. The thing about the 5-year-olds, it's not so much what I was into, even though for me it was profound, because what you'll find is that in my story, I'll skip one ahead. I don't know why my clicker stopped working. But in my story, I found ways to re-embrace this 5-year-old, and it was profound what it did for my business. In 2012, I got into technology when I absolutely did not belong in technology. And if I hadn't, I would have never had the exponential growth. And I did that because I loved to invent things that didn't exist. I loved
Mm.
them, and I was willing to step into that, even though it was ridiculous, made no sense. And it was at a time that technology is not like now, right? Software, you can build it now pretty easily. So it's a very scary thing. That was part of my inventor thing. The cowboy piece was about always being out there. I was a rock star in the college days, and then I was always doing things that were, wanting to help people, the whole cowboy hero spirit.
Yeah.
Astronaut. I didn't go to space yet, but I became a pilot. And I also went to and started a company in India, which felt like I was stepping onto the moon. So there's all kinds of fun stuff, but I'm constantly looking at it. And now, obviously, I'm not a TV evangelist, but I am somewhat of an evangelist. So I
Yeah.
try to find ways that I can re-inject this, because what I've found is that the raw passion, the raw momentum for each one of us individually, and in turn, the people that we can help unlock this is sometimes trapped in that kid.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's very interesting. A way of looking like the astronaut. And then when you built a company in India,
Mm-hmm.
framing that as like, okay, this is like a new world, a new
I
place.
mean, it
Like
was.
that's,
I
yeah.
went there, so I'd never been to India. And in
Yep.
1 week, and I already like to do things crazy. I'm fairly fast. I've been on the
Yep.
Inc. 500 list 8 times. So
Wow.
I like speed, and this was it too fast for me. But I
Yeah.
went there, never been to the country. And in 1 week, I went there thinking we would find some people we could outsource to, maybe pay them PayPal or something. And
Yep.
in 1 week, we ended up having to lease a building for 3 years, get
Yeah.
an attorney, get an accountant. I met
Oh
with the
my gosh.
government, hired 6 actual employees, started a
Oh,
bank account, bought 3 air conditioners, hired contractors, and bought a door. By the way, you have to bring your own AC and your own door if you want
oh
to
my
open it up in
gosh.
India. Just keep that in mind. I still own 3 ACs in India. If anybody's looking for one, they're Mitsubishi. But anyway, so it was wild. I flew home from that thinking, what in the heck did I just do? And keep in mind, it was a week after I did my first acquisition,
Oh my
which was to
gosh.
buy the tech company that built me the prototype.
Yeah. So you basically didn't sleep for a week is what it sounds like.
Oh, it was so insane. Like, luckily, they had one nice hotel in this random town in
Yeah.
Southeast India. Otherwise, I don't
Oh,
know if I'd have made it if it didn't have
oh my
the decent
gosh.
hotel. But I mean, that was some real go where at least I'd never been before, and nobody I knew had been before.
Yeah, that's wild. So I
Mhm.
actually had one question that I wrote down, and it's going to take us back a few steps, but I wanted to ask this because you said safety within a culture, and I want to make sure I understand that correctly.
Okay.
So safety within the culture is it the way I interpreted that was allowing the team to be who they are authentically, but also no ideas are shot down. It's completely safe to be in your full creative state and exactly who you are. Am I understanding safety in a culture in the right way?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Cool. Perfect. Beautiful. Okay, so where would you like to go next? Do we
I'd
should we
like to
unmute some
see who
people?
has questions from the audience. Now that
Okay.
with a little bit of time, I'd love to do a couple of game sessions.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do, guys. If you have a question, go ahead and just put a question in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and bring you on. You guys can also share sort of what where you were at 5 years old. I know for me, when I was five, I went right into like being a fire. I was like a fireman because my dad was a fireman. But I also, and this is kind of interesting. I remember being asked in sixth grade, "What do you want to do as a job?" And I remember thinking, "I want to be the boss." And so for me, I didn't ever thought about starting a business, but like leadership was always on my mind and being a fireman was always on my mind. And it's interesting because I never put any of this stuff together until right now. And it was like, even as a kid, it was just like, there was something about leadership that was just
But it
intriguing.
wasn't just leadership. So it was leadership plus the fireman.
Yeah.
And the fireman is equally as important, because
Yeah.
what is a fireman, right? It's this
It's
very,
helping
very
people.
noble
Yeah.
and like heroic role, more so
Yeah.
than any other first responder at this point.
Right.
If you think about it, because like, I mean, I have mad respect for the police, but
Right.
everybody has a weird relationship with that, but not really firemen. It's
Right.
this like pure thing of like wanting to help people that are in need. And
Yeah.
that's why you're not just a typical, I want to be a boss, buy a sports car, and tell people what to
Right.
do.
Right.
So there's
Yeah.
definitely something there that's beautiful.
Very interesting.
Hmm.
Awesome. Cool. Carolyn, let's have you unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we'll go to Donnell after that.
Hey, thank you so much for this. I'm building a business where I try to help people be who they are and what they do best so that they don't waste their talent. So this whole concept of trying to go back, my question is, what advice would you give your younger self if you could? I struggle with this, like, well, going through all those struggles brought me to who I am today, but if I could go back, would I change anything, or what would my advice be? I want to help professionals, and I also want to reach back to teams. But like, what have you thought about that? And what would you?
Absolutely. First of all, I am a huge fan of no regrets. I love the failures I have. I sleep with them at night. I pet them. We cuddle. I absolutely love failure, and I absolutely eat it for breakfast. So I'm all about it, because I mean, how would we have gotten here, right? I tell my wife all the time, we have 6 kids. I forgot to mention that. Yep. Wow. So shockingly, none of them have run around tonight, because I'm actually on vacation, but I didn't want to tell Julie no. So anyway, long story short, it's like sometimes my wife's like, well, because we have a love your weird family now. Right. So like the challenge for me is I'm working with all these midlife people, and my wife will come to me, and sometimes when we're in like a fight, she'll throw my body of work or my thought leadership back in my face. It's a real thing. She'll be like, oh yeah, you're really the love your weird guy, huh? Or like you're being super authentic. So that's a whole thing, but we have fun with it. But here's the thing. I go back to this too with her. I'm like, look, we trying to do parenting differently now, right? We're trying to parent these kids more like we would want to have been parented, but some of that stuff was good, right? It's like, it's a weird time right now where it's like, I don't really know some of the stuff we're not doing that's going to hurt them later. Mm-hmm. So like, I just trust my instinct. Like if it's time to raise my voice a little bit or be stern, like my wife's like, oh no, we don't want any of that. I'm like, dude, look, we turned out good. We can say we want about grandma, say we want about mom and dad, but like, dude, I'm happy with where I'm at in life. So yeah, so there's that. So what would I tell my kid self at 5 years old? I would tell them to never stop loving your weird. Never stop loving your weird. Lean into it. And luckily I had a mom and a dad that were outliers, and a mom that continued to challenge that on me. So my journey to reconnect with my inner child was not as long of a journey as a lot of people's is. So I just want to say that as well. The reason why many times we disconnect from the 5-year-old is because of, on the light side, conditioning from people, from teachers, from schooling, from all kinds of stuff. Like George Land and them, they blamed the school system, right? But it goes deeper than that. Now, on the bigger side, it's a major trauma. Someone took advantage of me as a child, or someone, did something that really victimized me as a child. Those things are the work that we do individually to reconnect there. So I always want to mention that, like, if anybody's on this call and it's not that easy to remember what I did at 5, or I don't like thinking about 5, that's okay. You don't have to rush this process. It 100% is a process. It's a journey. That person is still in there. That person is beautiful. And that person is what a lot of times wants to come out. And when you create a culture for your people to feel safe to show up any which way, it's pretty powerful. And some amazing things end up coming from it. So I would tell my younger self to love your weird. Don't ever stop loving your weird.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
Awesome. Donnell, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so pumped. I'm like sweating. This is awesome. Thank you for doing this for us.
I'm sweating too.
So first of all, I just want to say I was a firefighter in the Navy for a number of years. So that's hilarious.
Wow. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. When I was 5, I actually used to get in trouble a lot because I would tell the teacher better ways to do things. One time there was
yeah. I love it.
We were going to the assembly in the gym, and I challenged the teacher, and I was like, I'm going to get there a better way. And half the class followed me. I got in a lot of trouble, but it worked. And we got there first anyway. It's just interesting that you say that. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I would always ask why, or I wouldn't eat anything. Like, eat an apple. Why? What does it do for me? Why all the time? And, so now I'm on this journey, and I'm back into that a little bit, I think, before.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Fall in line.
It's funny you mentioned that. I wrote 2 books about why. I just now got into weird the last few years. I had The Art of Why was in 2016 and Breaking Why was in 2022. So I'm all about it. You do have to ask that. And a lot of times in these types of settings, depending on the topic, I'll start with that. Everybody goes around and says why they're here. But yeah, that's wonderful. And sometimes because it's curiosity, right? And then now curiosity is becoming popular again. You'll see it kind of in the zeitgeist where a lot of people are talking about it. And it's because it's a powerful unlock for growth and imagination and innovation and things like that. So little did you know, right, that as annoying as you were to all of your parents or whoever by asking why all the time, you were onto something.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
It's one of the things we did when we had a big growth period in 2018. And I remember I just woke up one day and realized I had been doing everything in the business that people told us we should be doing. And I was just like, I don't want to do any of this stuff anymore. Why do I need to do all of this stuff? And we just figured out our own mold. And then it was like, boom, we did our first $1 million in 9 months after that moment of just like shedding all the stuff we thought we were supposed to do. So it's the like asking the why has been very powerful for us in our business as well.
All day.
Yeah. Russell, when you want to unmute yourself and go next. There we go.
Oh, there you go. Russell.
So I'm really enamored by your concept of embracing your mistakes, perhaps even enthusiastically, because I've got quite a few. I think my imagination and inventiveness as a youth was really so, they boxed it in so hard in through the school system and a small town. You've got to be in the in crowd, and to be in the in crowd, you've got to do everything the way they do it. That's right. I'm only maybe in the last 4 or 5 years seeing my way out of that box, but now I'm carrying this big bag of rocks of all the things that I think I did wrong. And instead of beating myself up and going, well, you're better now, you need to live for today, I kind of love that idea of just embracing every one of those mistakes as this is how you got here today. This is what brought you here. You paid for this. Enjoy it. So can you elaborate on how you do that? Do you have any sort of methodology, any sort of scheme to it?
Yeah, and it's very simple. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing that. So here's what it boils down to. A lot of people out there that they get mad at I'm going to use this word God for a second, right? So people get mad at God. People have different opinions about God, and whether there's a God or not is irrelevant. Here's what is important. They say things like, how could a God allow for X to happen, right? If there's a good universe or there's a good energy, why did all this bad stuff happen to me? Why did I get treated all these different ways? And so the answer is simple, and it actually is also the answer to your question. Because you're like, okay, I've got this bag of rocks and this idea of how do I drop the rocks? How do I take those rocks and I just drop them? And the way that you drop the rocks, okay, no matter what it is that you've gone through, is you start to look at how those things, quote, bad that happened to you and how those rocks uniquely qualify you. Number one, how do they uniquely qualify you to help someone else going through a similar issue that only you are qualified now to do, or you are very uniquely qualified to help with? And then number two, you step into that. So the way to drop the rock and to turn the failure into this beautiful thing is by using it to help somebody else that might not be able to help in the same way. When we start to help others, so why do all of a sudden you got these drug addicts and alcoholics, right? Right, where they're constantly relapsing. They just can't figure it out. And all the medicine in the world, all the rehabs in the world, all the education in the world, and all the workouts in the world, none of it's working. And then all of a sudden, a random other drug addict who's willing to try to helps that person, and they get sober. It's because experience is power. And you have an experience that is powerful for other people. And the reason why you feel like you're holding the rocks is because you need to give them away, not to weigh them down. But as you start to share those rocks with people, they start to get very light. Okay. And the gravitational pull starts to shift. I wanted to be an astronaut. I'm obsessed with gravity. And always my one wish at every birthday, I'll tell y'all, even though it might not make the wish come true, but every single wish has been, I want to fly. I want to fly, like without a machine, just fly. Right. That's my wish to this day when I blow out the candles. Right. So I love this idea of how do I get lighter? How do I get freer to do more? And that secret is to bring them with you. Bring people with you. And it's counterintuitive because you're like, man, well, how am I going to take care of myself? Or how will I find the time? And the fact is, you just do if you make that number one. That's why I talk about the sobriety and empathy and all that stuff. When I started realizing that, like, no matter what, I'm going to help people that I have experience to help with and unconditionally. So I'm not even just talking about work. I'm talking about who's around you. So who can you help? And I don't help everybody. I help people that asked. I was invited here today, right? So there's a reason why there's a certain energy right now. It's because I was invited. I don't go where I'm not invited. But when I go to meetings and things like that, guess what? That's where people that are desperate are going to. So find a space where people are desperate that need your help, that have been through the same thing as you, and start helping them and watch what happens to the weight of those rocks.
That's so good. So good. Thank you for that. Do you have time for like one or two more questions? Is that okay?
I'm good. I'm easy.
Okay.
Kids might run through,
great.
but I'm good. Whatever y'all want to do.
That was really good. I know Suki has a question, so do you want to unmute yourself and take it away? Ask your question.
Yeah, a great presentation. Loved it. How many times have you reinvented yourself in your life?
Hold on, let me count. 363. I try to do every day. I'm kind of a freak. My wife's always like, what the hell? I was talking to my friend yesterday about like this, like when I talk about experimentation, they're like, oh my God, yeah, you live that. Because let me tell you this. Yesterday, I did a talk for the Chief organization. Okay. It was all women executives. And I wasn't happy with the flow of it. So literally last night, I emailed Julie and said, I'd like to do something different. And I completely changed today's format based on yesterday's feedback and surveys. So that to give you a little insight on how nutty I am as far as experimenting with new things. And I knew, and it's not the first time I've done a format like this, but it's a little bit of a hybrid because I don't always share my screen. But I was like, okay, I'm not doing yesterday again, right? So I'm constantly micro reinventing, constantly. But you don't have to reinvent yourself all the way every time if you know who you are, right? So what were you at 5? What were you into?
I used to make little acorn men. I like making them into characters, and then I used to try and sell them to my friends. And I thought I was going to have
Lego.
A huge
Did you say
business.
Lego characters?
No, acorns that you could pick up at the forest around the back of us.
That's right. So you were making acorn people. You were trying to sell them to friends to give them the joy of the acorn people, and you loved that imagining of acorns. And when did you stop playing with acorns?
Oh, I don't know, maybe about 7, 8, maybe. I mean, maybe I went on to, I think I went on to, other things when I ended up with all these acorn things that I couldn't sell. But yeah, I loved making them into characters.
Well, what if you found some acorns and didn't try to sell them? You just gave them to some people.
Yeah, absolutely. I did to my best friends, of course, and they probably just chucked them away, and they were kind to me. But yeah, I mean, it was the making of the process of making them that was equally as nice.
Yes. And what do you make now? So you're not making as many acorns now, which you could for fun. But what are you making now? What do you make?
Oh, I invented an application, and I've been quite passionate about it to help people. And yeah, that's why I'm here at the moment. So I basically invented an application and some encryption technology that I've managed to get patented, but I can't get the messaging right, which is why I'm here, and it's very powerful.
Okay, you want a quick boot camp?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, here we go. All right, so the encryption is for what? Safety?
Online data, yeah. Encryption
online data,
technology.
that's right. And what is the problem that you solve?
I solve how people curate their personal information and their personal, important, life essential documentation and precious sentimental stuff all together in one place.
And who is your target audience?
Joe Public, anyone that really has wants to be prepared in case anything happens.
Okay, so let's talk about something for a second. All right. Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and millennials understand apps in a different way than Xers and boomers, correct?
Sure.
You offer a service that you can get from multiple apps, but you do it in one app, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
And it's secure and protected.
Of course. So all of your messaging, first of all, your yes, can everybody buy your app? Of course they can, right? But if the only reason a Alpha or a Z is going to buy this app is if it's just crazy easy and free. Okay. Okay. The other generations are your audience, by the way. That's the audience you want. They're the most, especially the boomers, they're the most susceptible to this stuff. They're the highest rated people being taken advantage of online right now. Okay. And so what I would do is I would triple down on what problem you solve for them. And what you solve is a safe harbor for this world that has created this very, very dangerous environment. Okay, so you are that safe harbor in a world that is very chaotic and changing at this rapid speed. So what word have you chosen a word yet out of curiosity, like safety or security, or is there a word that keeps coming up for you that is as one word that describes your mission?
Protection.
Protection.
Yeah. And passing on stuff.
Yeah. So I want you to make your messaging not about the product at all. So one of the best products I ever invented, in fact, it was the one I sold to a Fortune 500 company. All right. A Fortune 500 company that owned 200 television stations, right? They were the juggernaut in media, and they came to a little company in Louisiana and paid us millions of dollars for that product. Why is that? It's because we knew how not just to build tech. We weren't the best tech. We knew how to change the conversation for the people that we served. And we served two people. We served the end user, which is the small and medium business. And we also served this broadcast industry that was struggling to continue to be relevant to their audience, which is these SMBs. But we didn't sell a customer experience marketing software with the big stack and attribution and big data and machine learning and AI and geofencing and all this other nonsense. What we sold was the ability for you to identify, and like a big thing for us was actually automotive dealers. Okay. So automotive dealers just couldn't get enough of this product. And it's because we knew who was going to buy a vehicle in any neighborhood in America within 3 to 4 months before they start shopping. Mm-hmm. Now, when I tell that to you, is that compelling?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy compelling, right?
Yeah.
And if you'd like, we can get into all of the sausage making of how it happens, and I'm happy to do it. But the important thing is that there's a part of you, you don't even sell cars and you're intrigued. You see what I'm saying? And so I want you to sell your product that way. Don't sell the features. Sell the dream based on what they need. And if that's protection, then it's protection.
That's really powerful. And Brandon has been helping me with this messaging. I am so totally in the right place here. It's really cool. Thanks. I really appreciate
it's beautiful.
That.
Yeah.
Happy to help.
That's great. All right. Can we do
now, Brandon, make sure y'all need to circle back and let me know what y'all end up coming up with.
Yeah, we definitely will. You got time for one more question?
I'm good. I'm good. Kids are in the lake. We're good.
Okay, awesome. Crystal, we'll wrap up with you. So unmute yourself and take it away.
Hi, I would love to hear more about connecting with your 5-year-old and how that supports us in our current life.
Yeah,
I think it aligns with what I do, and so I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. All right. So there's two pieces to that question. One is how. I'm going to do that second. The first I'm going to do is why. Why is it so important in a talk? You guys showed up for a limitless growth talk, and we ended up talking about 5-year-olds. And there's a reason for that. Because the ability to create something that does not exist, Okay. Continuous growth does not happen by doing the same. It comes from doing something new. And the one thing about the 5-year-old essence, it's not necessarily what you were into at 5, which you're about to tell me, but it's not as much that as it is that there's something that every single one of us had at 5 that ends up being demolished over time. And that is that we overestimated our potential. We consistently overestimated our potential. And so, and it was ridiculous to the points at which we thought things were possible. But we're stepping into a world now where things we never thought were possible are now possible with AI. And we're literally just getting warmed up. So what better mindset to go into this absolutely insanely fast-moving, new unknown world that's going to change everything? I don't care who argues that. We can talk after. What better mindset to go into than that mindset? And so that's why it's so important. And so the whole like, hey, what were we going to do at 5? That's just the starting point. It also, by the way, aligns with kind of why you do what you do, which is also cool. So showing up present is big with that. So for you, all right. So what were you into at 5 years old?
At 5 years old, I was really into horses. Mm-hmm. I was into finding rocks and gardening and music. And I always wanted to help people. And those were all the big things.
All right. Thank you. First and foremost, what did you love about the horses?
The freedom. They're so beautiful, and they run free, and yet they're powerful, and all the things I always wanted in my life.
Beautiful. Yep. So your horses are kind of like my anti-gravity. I love it. Okay, so let's talk about this. What did you love about the gardening?
The gardening is creating and growing your own food and being connected to the family and, pulling out the weeds and then going out and eating from that space.
Yes. It sounds like what you do for a living is that you're building a business that wants to set people free. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And you want to help people free to grow in whatever direction they want, right? And let me ask you a question. When it came to the gardening, because I've thought a lot about this, is there anything like, did you make the plants grow?
I was there. I created the space for it.
Yes. You created the conditions for it.
Yeah. Imagine the strawberries, and the strawberries would get overrun.
Yes.
And we needed to create space so that they would actually grow.
So there is some invisible force, no matter what we want to call it, folks. There is an invisible force on our side. If we create the conditions, growth is a natural byproduct. Freedom is a natural byproduct. So all we have to do is double down on creating the right conditions, because it was conditions to begin with that made you think that you didn't need to focus on horses, gardening, music, and rocks and things like that. That was conditioning that muted that part of yourself that was wildly open to all possibilities. It was conditions that did it, and it will be conditions that will undo it. And so that is the power of this, because what is our 5-year-old self? It's us. It's always there, always has been there, always will be there. This is about, how do I show up wholeheartedly? I show up wholeheartedly by making sure that all of me is present. And that is where we unlock our full potential, our full capacity. And that's the power of showing up at the 5-year-old. It starts by inventorying it. It starts by acknowledging it like we did here today. And then from there, it's having fun with it, just like I did here. I mean, I did a photo shoot just to get a picture of me with a beaker and a space helmet. And they asked me to be on Times Square recently. And so I used the picture with the space helmet. It didn't even have my face, but that was me continuing to double down on the weird, double down on who am I, even though it makes no sense. I mean, half of what we talked about today, corporate people might be like, what just happened? But intuitively, this is the goal. It's not brute force. It's not just more of the same. It's something new, and new does not come because we just decide we want something new. So
that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Frankie, thank you so much for being here, sharing your knowledge with us, and taking time to answer questions. I'm very, very, extremely grateful for it. If people want to learn more about you, where's the best way to go? Books, social media, like what's the best way to do that?
Normally I have a QR code, but I forgot to put it up, and then that way you could download books and all kinds of fun stuff. So why don't you do this? Why don't you find me on LinkedIn or Instagram or, any of those, Facebook. And then, of course, frankierusso.com is great too. If you really want to go deeper, you want to talk more, send me a message on LinkedIn or you can email me from the website. But would love to keep the conversation going. Happy to support this. Julie is amazing for inviting me. I think I found her in the Outlier program. Is that right, Julie?
Yep, that's correct.
There you go. So it's just how do we spread the communities? Here we go. All right. Yeah. So reach out to me, please. I would love to see what everybody's up to. I know we didn't have time to talk to everyone. Happy to keep the conversation going.
Cool. So everyone go check him out. It's Frankie. It's Frank and then an IE at the end. And then Russo is RUSSO.com. Go check him out. Again, Frankie, thank you so much for being here. Very grateful. And for everyone here who's live with us, can you guys just give some gratitude and thanks to Frankie for spending an hour and 15 minutes with us. And make sure you go read those comments, Frankie. They're great. Everyone loved it.
I can't wait. Are you going to send them to me or something?
Yeah, I'll have Julie send it over to you.
Okay, yeah, I saw a lot of stuff popping up. I couldn't read any of it, but it was exciting just to watch. So I love everybody. It's been my pleasure. We'll talk soon.
All right, take care. Bye, everybody. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.